The massive alien ship appeared in Earth's orbit on a Tuesday morning. It was twice the size of the largest human space station and shaped like a twisted spiral shell. For 6 hours, it did nothing. It sent no signals. It made no moves. It simply hung in space, its surface shimmering with a blue-green light that reminded watchers of Earth's oceans. World leaders gathered in emergency meetings. Military forces went on high alert, and ordinary people everywhere looked up at the sky, wondering if this was the beginning of the end. Then, finally, the ship sent a message. "We come in peace. We need your help." The aliens called themselves the Varnathi. They looked like tall, thin humanoids with skin, the color of polished copper, and 4 arms instead of 2. Their eyes were large and completely black, and they had no visible ears or nose, just small breathing slits on either side of their narrow faces. 3 days after the ship's arrival, Captain John Miller stood in United Space Command headquarters, watching the live feed of the alien ambassador speaking. To the human delegation, "The Xian-Tai will not stop until they have consumed every living thing in our star systems," said Ambassador Kirksel, the Varnathi representative. His voice came through the translator with an odd musical quality. "They have already destroyed 3 of our colony worlds. Billions of our people are dead." John frowned. He was a career military man with 20 years of service, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. First contact with an alien species, and they wanted humans to fight their war. "And you believe our weapons can help you?" asked General Frank Howard, the head of Earth's defense forces. "Your species has perfected the art of warfare in ways we never did," Kirksel replied. "The Varnathi focused on peaceful growth, on biological science and space travel. We never needed advanced weapons until the Xian-Tai came." Dr. Susan Grant stood next to John, taking notes on her tablet. As Earth's leading xenobiologist, she had been called in to study the Varnathi. "Their biology is fascinating," she whispered. To John, "Their cellular structure allows them to heal injuries much faster than humans. And their brain capacity is about 30% larger than ours." John nodded, but kept his eyes on the screen. Something about this situation felt wrong. Why would an advanced alien species need help from humans? Earth had only established its first Mars colony 15 years ago. The Varnathi had ships that could travel between stars. The meeting ended with an agreement. A human team would travel with the Varnathi back to their home system to assess the situation. Then Earth's leaders would decide what help they could offer. 2 days later, John was called to General Howard's office. The general was a large man with a permanently stern expression. His office walls were covered with medals and photos from his long military career. "Captain Miller, you're being assigned to lead the mission to Varnathi space," the general said without preamble. "We need someone with combat experience who can think on their feet." John straightened his back. "Yes, sir. When do we leave?" "In 1 week. The USS Challenger has been prepared for deep space travel. Dr. Grant will go with you as your science advisor, along with a crew of 20 military personnel and 10 civilian scientists." Later that day, John met with Dr. Grant in the secure research facility where she had been studying the Varnathi biological samples. Susan looked tired. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "The Varnathi are hiding something," she said as soon as John entered her lab. "What do you mean?" She gestured to her screens, which showed microscopic images of cells. "They've told us about their conflict with the Xian-Tai, but they're being vague about details. And there's something strange about their genetic structure. It has markers that remind me of engineered organisms." John leaned closer to the screen. "You think they've modified themselves?" "I think they're masters of biological engineering, which makes me wonder why they need our weapons technology yet. All with their knowledge, they could create biological weapons far more effective than our bombs and lasers. John thought about this as he left the research facility. The sun was setting, turning the sky a deep orange. In 1 week, he would leave that sky behind and travel farther from Earth than any human had ever gone. At the military barracks, he reviewed the personnel files for his crew. Most were experienced space travelers and soldiers he had worked with before. But one name was unfamiliar: Lieutenant Paul Winters, assigned as communications specialist. Winters' file contained minimal information. He had joined the military 3 years ago and had served on Earth's moon base for most of that time. His performance evaluations were excellent, but there was something odd about the file. Several sections were marked as classified, which was unusual for a junior officer. John made a note to keep an eye on Winters during the mission. The week passed quickly with preparations. The USS Challenger was loaded with supplies for a 6-month journey. The Varnathi had provided technology that would allow the human ship to travel through something they called fold space, cutting the journey from decades to weeks. On the day of departure, John stood on the bridge of the Challenger, watching his crew at their stations. Dr. Grant was setting up her lab equipment in the science bay. Ambassador Kirksall and 2 other Varnathi were in their special quarters, adjusted to meet their atmospheric needs. Lieutenant Winters sat at the communications console. He was a young man, perhaps 30, with short blonde hair and intense blue eyes. He seemed nervous, his fingers tapping constantly on the edge of his console. "Something wrong, Lieutenant?" John asked. Winters jumped slightly. "No, sir. Just eager to get started." John nodded and moved on, but he noticed beads of sweat on Winters' forehead despite the cool temperature of the bridge. What no one on the ship knew was that Lieutenant Paul Winters was not just a communications specialist. 6 months earlier, he had volunteered for a secret military program called Project Cerberus. A program had injected him with experimental nanobots designed to enhance human soldiers, making them stronger, faster, and more resistant to injury. Project scientists had assured military leaders that the enhancements were stable. They were wrong. As the USS Challenger lifted off from Earth and prepared to enter fold space for the journey to Varnathi territory, the nanobots in Winters' bloodstream were already beginning to change, responding to some unknown trigger. And deep within his cells, a terror was taking form, one that would soon threaten not just the Varnathi and the mysterious Zentai, but every living being in the galaxy. The USS Challenger moved through fold space like a fish through dark water. Outside the viewports, reality twisted into strange patterns of light and shadow. Most of the crew stayed away from the windows during transit. The sight made many people sick. 3 weeks into the journey, Captain John Miller sat in his quarters reviewing reports. The ship was functioning well, but he worried about the crew. Being the first humans to travel this far from Earth was taking its toll. Some showed signs of stress. Others were too excited to sleep properly. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," John called. Dr. Susan Grant entered, carrying her tablet. "Captain, I need to show you something." She placed the tablet on his desk. On the screen was an image of what looked like a DNA strand, but with strange patterns John had never seen before. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "Ambassador Kirksall finally gave me more detailed information about the Zentai," Susan said. "According to him, they're parasitic beings that take over host bodies. But when I compared their genetic structure to known parasitic species from Earth, I found something odd." She pointed to a section of the DNA. "These markers suggest a species that evolved to form symbiotic relationships, not parasitic ones." "Symbiotic means—" "I know what symbiotic means, Doctor," John said with a small smile. "Two species living together for mutual benefit." Susan nodded. "Exactly. So why would a naturally symbiotic species suddenly become aggressive parasites? It doesn't make sense biologically. John leaned back in his chair. You think the Varnathi aren't telling us the whole truth? I think there's more to this war than they're saying. After Susan left, John decided to speak with Ambassador Kirksel. He found the Varnathi in the ship's observation lounge, staring out at Fold space. The alien's forearms were folded across his chest in what John had learned was a posture of deep thought. Ambassador, may I join you? John asked. Kirksel turned. His large black eyes reflected the strange lights from outside. Captain Miller, please do. John sat across from the alien. Up close, he could see the fine scales that covered Kirksel's copper-colored skin and the way his breathing slits pulsed gently. I was hoping you could tell me more about your people's history with the Zentai, John said. When did the conflict begin? Kirksel was quiet for a moment. 50 of your Earth years ago, we discovered the Zentai homeworld. At first, our meetings were peaceful. We traded knowledge. But then they changed. They became aggressive. They attacked our research outposts. They began to take our people as hosts. And before they changed, what were they like? They were explorers, like us. Their natural form is small, like your jellyfish, but able to survive. In space, they would join with willing hosts to experience life in solid form. John thought about what Susan had told him. So they were symbiotic, not parasitic. Kirksel's breathing slits flared. Yes, until they weren't. On the other side of the ship, Lieutenant Paul Winters stood in the small bathroom attached to his quarters, staring at his reflection. His eyes had changed. The blue was brighter, almost glowing, and there were thin, dark lines spreading under his skin from his temples down his neck. Paul splashed cold water on his face. The headaches were getting worse, and his dreams. In his dreams, he heard voices speaking in languages he didn't understand. He saw stars and planets he had never visited. He had been told the Project Cerberus enhancements would make him stronger, faster, better. No one had mentioned these side effects. A sharp pain shot through his head, and Paul gripped the sink to stay upright. When it passed, he noticed the metal edge of the sink had bent under his fingers. He needed to report these symptoms, but fear kept him silent. What if they quarantined him? What if the enhancements were failing, and he was dying? The project leaders had sworn him to secrecy. No one on the ship, not even Captain Miller, knew about Cerberus. Paul decided to visit Dr. Kevin Holt, the ship's psychologist, and at least talk about the headaches and strange dreams. Maybe Holt could give him something to help him sleep better. Elsewhere on the ship, Science Officer Diane Wells was working late in the communications lab. Her job was to study and catalog any transmissions they picked up during the journey. Most were just background radiation or echoes from distant stars. But tonight, she had found something interesting. It was an old signal, perhaps decades old, traveling through space from a system near Varnathi territory. The universal translator was having trouble with it, but Diane could make out certain words. Peaceful, exchange, welcome. She checked the signal against Ambassador Kirksel's star charts. The transmission's point of origin matched the location of a Zentai outpost. Diane sent a message to Captain Miller's tablet, marking it urgent. This could be important evidence about the true nature of the Zentai. In the engineering section. Chief Engineer Maria Rodriguez was examining a piece of Varnathi technology. The aliens had provided several devices to help the human ship navigate Fold space. This particular device was meant to stabilize the ship's energy field during transit. Maria had taken it apart against the Varnathi's advice to understand how. It worked. Inside, she found something unexpected, a component that seemed to generate a specific energy frequency. This frequency didn't match anything needed for space travel. She ran a scan of the component and compared the energy signature. to known technologies. The closest match was to experimental human devices designed to influence brain activity. Maria frowned. Why would a navigation device contain technology that affected the brain? She decided to speak with Dr. Grant about her discovery. 4 days later, the USS Challenger emerged from fold space at the edge of Varnathy territory. The view that greeted them was both awesome and terrible. A vast field of debris floated in space, the remains of destroyed space stations and ships. Beyond it, a red giant star burned, surrounded by planets. One of the planets was clearly damaged, with a large crack visible even from space. And everywhere there were ships, thousands of them, of all sizes. They were packed with Varnathy refugees, fleeing from their homes. Captain John stood on the bridge, staring at the scene. Ambassador Kirksell, you didn't tell us the situation was this bad. The ambassador's voice was heavy with grief. This is only one system. The Zentai have destroyed many more. Just then, Lieutenant Winters, who was monitoring communications, called out. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from a ship approaching from the far side of the debris field. Varnathy? John asked. No, sir. Winter's voice shook slightly. According to the translator, it's Zentai. A tense silence fell over the bridge. John straightened his uniform jacket. On screen, Lieutenant. The view screen flickered, and a face appeared. It wasn't what anyone expected. The being looked almost like a human, but with pale blue skin and silver eyes. When it spoke, its voice was soft and musical. Greetings, Earth vessel. We are the Zentai Council. We have been waiting for you. There is much you need to know about the true enemy in this war. The meeting took place on a neutral space station positioned between the Varnathy refugee fleet and the approaching Zentai vessel. Captain John Miller led a small team that included Dr. Susan Grant, Lieutenant Paul Winters, and 2 security officers. Ambassador Kirksell represented the Varnathy, while 3 Zentai delegates waited for them in the station's conference room. Up close, the Zentai were even more striking. Their blue skin had a slight shimmer to it, and their silver eyes seemed to catch and reflect light from all angles. They wore simple white clothing that contrasted sharply with the elaborate robes of the Varnathy. I am Siren, first speaker of the Zentai Council, said the delegate in the center. Her voice was clear through the translator. We appreciate your willingness to hear our side of this conflict. John nodded politely, but remained cautious. We're here to understand the full situation before Earth commits to any action. Siren gestured to a display screen on the wall. It showed images of a peaceful-looking world with tall crystal structures rising from blue-green forests. This was our homeworld before the Varnathy came. We were a peaceful species who had just begun to explore space. Ambassador Kirksell made a harsh sound. You twist the truth, Zentai. Siren continued as if he hadn't spoken. The Varnathy found something on our world that interested them, our natural ability to merge with other life forms. For thousands of years, we had formed beneficial partnerships with willing hosts. The joining enhanced both beings. The screen changed to show laboratory images. The Varnathy took samples of our genetic material. They ran experiments. They were trying to recreate our ability to merge with hosts, but with one key difference. They wanted complete control over the joined being. John turned to Kirksell. Is this true? The Varnathy's 4 hands clenched and unclenched. It is ... not entirely false. We were interested in the Zentai's unique biology, but our research was for peaceful purposes. Peaceful? Siren's voice rose slightly. You created living weapons. The screen showed new images creatures that looked neither Varnathy nor Zentai, but something in between, with unnaturally enhanced muscles and strange growths on their bodies. When their first attempts failed, Siren continued, They found genetic material from another species, from an old probe that had entered our star system. Susan leaned forward. Human DNA? You found human genetic material? Kirksel's breathing. Slits flared rapidly, a sign of distress. John had learned. It was a small sample, very old, from an Earth probe that must have drifted into our space decades ago. The Varnathi discovered that human DNA had unique properties, Siren said. It was adaptable in ways our species were not. They used it to create a new type of hybrid soldier. John felt cold anger building inside him. You used human genetic material to make weapons without our knowledge or consent? Kirksel lowered his head. We were desperate. The experiments were meant to create defenders, not aggressors. But something went wrong, Susan guessed. The hybrids were more intelligent than expected, Kirksel admitted. They developed self-awareness. They turned against us. They called themselves the Nexus and began attacking both Varnathi and Zentai worlds. So the real enemy in this war is neither of your species, John said. It's these Nexus hybrids you created using our DNA. Yes, Siren said. And they grow stronger each day. They adapt. They evolve. They learn. Lieutenant Winters, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly gasped and grabbed his head. Captain, he said through gritted teeth, something's wrong. John turned to see Winters doubled over in pain. Lieutenant? Winters straightened. Up with a jerk, his eyes now glowing bright blue. Dark lines pulsed beneath his skin, spreading visibly across his face. When he spoke, his voice had changed, becoming deeper and resonating strangely. I can hear them. Susan moved toward him cautiously. Paul, what's happening? Instead of answering, Winters let out an inhuman scream. His body convulsed, and before anyone could react, his right arm elongated and transformed, the fingers merging into sharp claws. The security officers raised their weapons, but Winters moved with impossible speed. He struck one officer across the chest, sending him flying into the wall. The other fired his weapon, but the energy blast seemed to be absorbed into Winters' changing body. Everyone out! John shouted, grabbing Susan's arm and pulling her toward. The door-god Ambassador Kirksel stood frozen, staring at Winters. It's not possible, he whispered. The transformation. It's like the Nexus. Winters or the thing he was becoming turned to Kirksel. You recognize your own work, Creator? The voice was Paul's but distorted, as if multiple voices spoke. At once, your experiments with human DNA were just the beginning. Humans have continued to perfect what you started. John pushed Susan through the door and turned back. Paul, fight it. Whatever this is, you can resist it. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in Winters' glowing eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Paul Winters is becoming something greater. Project Cerberus was the missing piece the Nexus needed. With that, he launched himself at the remaining security officer, tearing through the man's protective gear as if it were paper. The officer's scream cut off abruptly. John slammed his hand on the emergency lockdown button beside the door. Metal barriers began to drop, sealing the conference room. The last thing John saw before the barrier closed completely was Winters turning toward the Zentai delegates, a predatory smile on his transformed face. Back on the USS Challenger, Doctor. Susan Grant worked frantically in her lab, analyzing the blood samples she had collected from Lieutenant Winters during his routine medical exam weeks earlier. This can't be right, she muttered as she studied the results. Captain John paced behind her. They had managed to escape the space station with Siren and one other Zentai delegate. Ambassador Kirksel and the third Zentai had been trapped inside. With Winters, what is it? John asked. His blood contains nanobots, incredibly advanced ones. They're not like anything I've seen before. Susan looked up from her microscope. This wasn't a natural transformation. Paul was part of some kind of enhancement program. Project Cerberus, John said, remembering Winter's words. It must be a military program. But why would it suddenly activate now? The ship's communication system chimed, and Chief Engineer Maria Rodriguez's voice came through. Captain, you need to see this. The Varnathy device I was studying, it's activating on its own. John and Susan rushed to engineering. The device on Maria's workbench was pulsing with energy, emitting a high-pitched sound. It started right after we got the report about Lieutenant Winters, Maria explained. I think it's designed to trigger something. Maybe it activated whatever was in his system. Susan's eyes widened. The Varnathy knew. They must have detected the nanobots in Paul's blood when he came aboard. They deliberately triggered the transformation. Just then, alarms blared throughout the ship. Captain, to the bridge. Came the urgent call over the intercom. On the bridge, the view screen showed the space station where they had left Winters. A small shuttle was leaving the station, moving fast. Can we track it? John asked. Yes, sir, replied the officer at the navigation station. It's heading toward the edge of the system. The Nexus territory, Siren said quietly. She had followed them to the bridge. He's going to join them. And now he carries this Cerberus enhancement within him. John turned to her, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. What happens if the Nexus get hold of this technology? Siren's silver eyes reflected the stars on the view screen. Then what you call Project Cerberus will become the greatest terror this galaxy has ever known. 3 months passed. The situation grew worse with each passing day. The being that had once been Lieutenant Paul Winters now called himself Alpha. He had joined the Nexus and given them the Cerberus technology. The results were devastating. Captain. John Miller stood on the bridge of the USS Challenger, looking at the tactical display. Red markers showing Nexus-controlled territories had spread across 3 star systems. Yellow markers showing contested areas covered 5 more. Green safe. Zones were shrinking rapidly. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth, said the communications officer. John nodded. Put it through. A screen showed Admiral Nancy Brooks, her face tired and grim. Earth had sent reinforcements 2 months ago when the true nature of the threat became clear. Captain Miller, I've reviewed your latest report, Admiral Brooks said. The new Cerberus-enhanced Nexus soldiers are breaking through our defensive lines faster than expected. Yes, Admiral. Their ability to adapt to our weapons is unlike anything we've seen. Each time we find a weakness, they evolve to counter it within days. Admiral Brooks frowned. The combined fleet will arrive at junction point in 36 hours. That's our last good position to make a stand before they have a clear path to more populated systems. After the transmission ended, John went to the science lab. Dr. Susan Grant had barely left the lab in weeks. She was working with a team of Varnathy and Zentai scientists, searching for a way to stop the enhanced Nexus. The lab was crowded with equipment. Screens displayed complex genetic sequences and molecular structures. Susan looked up when John entered. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. Any progress? John asked. Susan pushed her hair back from her face. Maybe. We've identified the core component of the Cerberus program. It's designed to enhance human strength and speed, but it's the interaction with the Nexus biology that makes it so dangerous. You shut it down? We're working on a biological countermeasure, something that targets the specific genetic sequences in the enhanced Nexus. She gestured to a Zentai scientist working nearby. Taran has been invaluable. The Zentai understanding of symbiotic biology might be the key. John looked at the blue-skinned alien, who nodded respectfully. In the past months, the former enemies had become essential allies against the greater threat. How long until it's ready? John asked. Susan hesitated. A week, maybe 2. But there's a problem. It needs to be delivered directly to the Nexus Command World. Their central hive mind controls the enhancements. If we can infect that, it will spread to all enhanced Nexus. Getting to their command world would be a suicide mission, John said quietly. Susan met his eyes. I know. Later that day, John led a meeting with representatives from all 3 species. They gathered around a holographic display showing the Nexus Command World, a once beautiful planet, now covered in strange structures that looked like a mix of technology and living tissue. Our intelligence suggests that Alpha has established his headquarters here, John said, pointing to a massive structure near the planet's equator. He's coordinating the enhanced Nexus from this location. Siren, the Xin Tai delegate, studied the image. The transformation of this world happened so quickly. It should have taken decades for such changes, not months. The Cerberus program accelerated everything, said Krell, the new Varnathi ambassador who had replaced the fallen Kirksel. It was designed to rapidly adapt to changing conditions. Combined with our bioengineering and the Nexus hive mind, it created something that evolves almost instantly. Which is why we need to strike at the source, John continued. Dr. Grant's team has developed a countermeasure, but it must be delivered directly to Alpha and the central hive mind. The planet is heavily defended, said Admiral Brooks over the link. A full assault would be detected long before any ship could reach the surface. John took a deep breath. That's why I'm proposing a stealth mission. A single ship, modified with Zentai cloaking technology. A small team could slip through their defenses. There was silence as everyone considered the implications. Who would lead such a mission? Admiral Brooks finally asked. I will, John said simply. 2 days later, John stood in a hangar bay, looking at the ship that would carry him to the Nexus world. It was small, barely large enough for a crew of 5. Its hull was covered in a strange blue-silver material provided by the Zentai that would help it avoid detection. Dr. Susan Grant approached him, carrying a sealed container. The countermeasure is ready. It's designed to target the Cerberus enhancements and shut them down at the genetic level. John took the container. Will it kill them? No, it will just return them to their base Nexus state. Still dangerous, but not the unstoppable force they've become. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. I've been studying the original Cerberus data Earth sent us. The program was never meant to be permanent. The nanobots were designed to break down after completing their enhancements. What went wrong? The Nexus biology stabilized them. But there might still be a part of Paul Winters left inside Alpha, a part that remembers being human. If you can reach that part of him, it might help. John nodded, though he wasn't hopeful. The few glimpses they had seen of Alpha in transmissions showed little trace of the man he once knew. As final preparations were made, reports came in of a massive Nexus fleet gathering. They were preparing for a push toward Earth's colonies. This is our last chance, Admiral Brooks told John in their final briefing. If you can't shut down these enhanced Nexus, we'll have no choice but to fall back to Earth and prepare for the worst. The small stealth ship slipped away from the human fleet as a massive space battle erupted. The timing was perfect. All Nexus attention would be focused on the main attack, while John's team approached from the opposite direction. On the bridge of his ship, John watched the distant flashes of weapons fire. So many would die in that battle. He had to make sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain. That the journey to the Nexus command world took 3 days. As they approached, they saw the planet was surrounded by a web of defensive satellites and patrolling ships. Activating cloaking field, said the Zentai crew member operating the special systems. The ship seemed to fade from view as the Zentai technology bent light around them. They slipped past the outer defenses, holding their breath each time a Nexus ship passed nearby. as they entered the atmosphere. John looked down at the transformed surface of the planet. What had once been natural landscapes were now covered in sprawling structures that pulsed with an eerie light. And at the center was Alpha's fortress, their destination. "We're being scanned," the sensor operator suddenly reported. "Something's penetrating the cloak." Before anyone could react, the ship shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across. The control panels. "We've been hit," the pilot shouted, fighting with the controls. "We're going down." John strapped himself in as the ship plummeted toward the surface. The last thing he saw before impact was the looming structure of Alpha's fortress growing larger in the view screen. He had come to stop the terror Earth had unknowingly unleashed. Now he would have to complete his mission on foot in the heart of enemy territory. John woke to the taste of blood in his mouth. The ship had crashed in a field of strange glowing plants about 2 miles from Alpha's fortress. The impact had killed 2 of his crew instantly. Only John and the Zentai specialist, Taran, had survived. "Captain, we must move quickly," Taran said, helping John to his feet. "The crash will bring Nexus patrols." John checked the sealed container holding the countermeasure. It was undamaged. He grabbed his pack with extra weapons and supplies. "How far to the fortress?" he asked. 2 miles through difficult terrain," Taran replied. "But I sense many nexus between us and our target." They moved through the alien landscape as quickly as they could. The plants around them pulsed with an eerie blue light, and the air smelled like metal and ozone. In the distance, the massive fortress rose like a twisted mountain, its surface a mix of living tissue and mechanical components. They had gone less than half a mile when they heard the sound of Nexus patrols. John and Taran hid beneath a cluster of large, mushroom-like growths as a group of enhanced Nexus soldiers passed nearby. The soldiers were nightmare versions of the Nexus John had seen in earlier battles. Their bodies were larger, with extra limbs and strange growths that seemed to be both weapons and sensors. Some still had recognizably human features, but twisted and changed by the Cerberus enhancements. "They're evolving even faster now," John whispered. The Cerberus program was never meant to go this far. Taran's silver eyes reflected the blue light around them. "Alpha is pushing the evolution. He is remaking them in his image." Once the patrol passed, they continued toward the fortress. They had to hide twice more from Nexus groups. The closer they got to the fortress, the more Nexus they saw. "We'll never make it through the main entrance," John said, as they crouched behind a ridge overlooking the fortress. Hundreds of enhanced Nexus moved around the base of the structure. Taran pointed to a series of pipes extending from the side of the fortress into the ground. "Waste disposal systems. All biological entities produce waste. These may lead inside." The pipes were large enough for them to crawl through, though the smell was terrible, a mix of chemicals and rotting organic matter. They moved slowly through the dark tunnels, using small lights to guide their way. After what felt like hours, they reached a junction where the pipe opened into a larger maintenance tunnel. They climbed out, relieved to breathe somewhat fresher air. "We need to find the central chamber," John said. "According to our intelligence, that's where Alpha coordinates the hive mind." They moved cautiously through the maintenance tunnels. Occasionally, they passed Nexus workers, smaller, less enhanced versions that seemed focused on their tasks and paid little attention to the intruders. As they went deeper into the fortress, the walls became more organic, pulsing with what looked like blood vessels and nerve fibers. The whole structure felt alive. Finally, they reached a massive door that seemed to be made of both metal and living tissue. It pulsed with energy. "The central chamber is beyond," Taran said. "I can sense the hive mind strongly here." "How do we get in?" Taran placed his blue hand against a section of the wall. The Nexus integrated some Zen-Tai biology into their systems. I may be able to communicate with it. The wall seemed to respond to his touch, the tissue moving and reshaping. Slowly, a small opening formed in the door. Quickly, Taran whispered. It will not last long. They slipped through the opening into a vast chamber that took John's breath away. The room was circular, with a raised platform in the center. The walls were covered in pulsing tissue and technology that glowed with the same blue light they had seen outside. On the platform stood Alpha Dot. He had changed dramatically from the man John once knew as Lieutenant Paul Winters. He was taller now, his body reshaped by the Cerberus enhancements. His skin was a pale blue color, with dark lines running across it like circuit patterns. His eyes glowed with an intense blue light. Extra limbs, not quite arms, not quite tentacles, extended from his back. Around the platform, dozens of enhanced Nexus stood in silent attention. They were connected to the floor by tendrils that linked them to the larger system. Captain John Miller, Alpha said, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. I've been expecting you. John stepped forward, keeping the container with the countermeasure hidden behind his back. Paul, you're still in there somewhere, aren't you? Alpha tilted his head. Paul Winters was weak. Limited. I am so much more now. He gestured around the chamber. I am connected to thousands of minds. I am evolution itself. You're a mistake, John said. The Cerberus program was never meant to be used this way. The Cerberus program was merely the beginning. Look what I have created with it. Alpha spread his arms. A new species that combines the best of human adaptability, Varnathy bioengineering, and Zen-Tai symbiosis. You're destroying entire worlds, killing billions. Change requires sacrifice. The old must make way for the new. John took another step forward. Paul, listen to me. The nanobots in your system, they're breaking down. Susan found it in the data. The Cerberus program was designed to be temporary. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Alpha's face. You lie. Think about it. You've been experiencing pain, haven't you? Systems failing? That's why you're pushing the evolution so hard. You're trying to outrun the breakdown. Alpha's extra limbs twitched. I can fix it. I can adapt. No, you can't, but we can help you. John slowly brought the container around. This can stabilize you. Return you to what you were. A limited human? Never. Alpha raised his hand, and energy crackled around his fingers. I would rather die as a god than live as a man. He fired a blast of energy at John, who dove to the side. The container flew from his hands, sliding across the floor toward the platform. Taren moved with surprising speed, rushing toward the container. One of the enhanced Nexus stepped forward to intercept him, but Taran touched the creature's arm, and something passed between them. Some communication that made the Nexus hesitate. John pulled out his weapon and fired at Alpha, not to kill, but to distract. Alpha deflected the shots with a wave of his hand. Your weapons cannot harm me, Captain, he said. I have evolved beyond such things. John kept firing, moving to the side to draw Alpha's attention away from Taran, who had reached the container and was opening it. Paul, John called, remember who you are. Remember Earth. Remember your oath to protect, not destroy. Alpha paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. For just a moment, John saw something of the young lieutenant he had known. In that moment, Taran activated the countermeasure. A fine mist sprayed from the container, filling the air of the chamber. The Nexus around the room began to twitch and convulse as the biological agent attacked the Cerberus enhancements in their systems. Alpha screamed in rage and pain, his body convulsing. The extra limbs on his back thrashed wildly. He fell to his knees on the platform. What have you ... He gasped. Saved you from yourself, John said, approaching carefully. Alpha looked up, and his eyes were changing, the glow fading, the human irises becoming visible again. I can feel them. All of them dying, not dying, John said. Changing back. The countermeasure only affects the Cerberus enhancements. Alpha or Paul, as he was becoming again, struggled to his feet. He seemed smaller now, more human. The fleet, he said, his voice more recognizable. I sent them to attack your defensive line. John's heart sank. Can you call them back? Paul closed his eyes, concentrating. I'm still connected to the hive mind. Just barely double quotes, his face contorted with effort. I'm sending the shutdown command. Whether they obey? He collapsed again, and John rushed forward to catch him. Paul looked up at him, his eyes now fully human again. I'm sorry, he whispered. I couldn't control it. It was too powerful. It's over now, John said. No, Paul shook his head weakly. The Cerberus program. It's still out there. In others. Others? What do you mean? Project CERBERUS ... wasn't just me. There were others back on Earth, sleeper agents. His breathing was becoming labored. You have to warn them ... John looked at Taran, who had joined them on the platform. The Zentai's expression was grave. We will, John promised. We'll make sure this never happens again. Paul nodded, then closed his eyes. His breathing steadied as he fell unconscious. 3 weeks later, John stood in Admiral Brooks' office on Earth. Outside the window, he could see crews rebuilding parts of the city damaged in the brief fighting before the Nexus. Fleet had shut down. The Alliance is holding, Admiral Brooks said. The Varnathi and Zentai have signed the treaty, and all research into biological weapons has been banned in all 3 civilizations. And Project Cerberus? John asked. Shut down completely. All test subjects have been found and treated. She handed him a tablet. Except for these 3. They were off-planet when everything happened. We're still looking for them. John nodded grimly. And Paul? Lieutenant Winters is recovering. The psychological damage may never fully heal, but physically he's human again. John looked out at the city. They had stopped the immediate threat, but he knew the danger wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the last traces of Cerberus waited like seeds that could grow into a terror beyond imagination if they ever found fertile ground again. For now, though, 3 species had found common ground in the face of a shared enemy.